Welcome to the Rockwell Museum. If you don't know me already, I'm Erin Coe, the museum's executive director, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to tonight's annual Smithsonian lecture. We are honored to have with us tonight Rebecca Head Trautmann, Assistant Curator of Contemporary Art at the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian, where she has served since the museum was established in 2004. We are also proud to share tonight that the Rockwell has been a Smithsonian affiliate since 2015. A long-standing partnership that connects our community to the depth and breadth of the Smithsonian's collections, scholarship, and national network. On that note, I want to welcome Penny Kirkpatrick. Penny, thank you for being here, of Smithsonian Affiliations. So great to have you here, Penny. And I also want to welcome Brian Leone of Smithsonian Museum Conservation Institute. Brian, so great to have you here. Since becoming an affiliate, we have had the privilege of hosting 22 Smithsonian scholars, curators, and cultural leaders here in Corning. Yay, that's right. These speakers have represented a remarkable breadth of expertise from the National Museum of African American History and Culture to the National Portrait Gallery, from the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum to the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden. And both this year and last, we have had curators from the National Museum of the American Indian here as our speakers. Together, these distinguished speakers have brought to our community conversations that span American art, craft, and design, science and innovation, cultural heritage, and global perspectives, deepening our engagement with the Smithsonian's national and international network. This program comes at a particularly meaningful moment for the Rockwell Museum as we celebrate our 50th anniversary this year. Woohoo, yes, thank you. This is a milestone that we are marking with a year-long initiative that we have titled Rockwell Reframed. Throughout 2026, we are reflecting on the museum's evolution over 5 decades while also keeping an eye on the future, reframing how we share stories and interpret scholarship on American art while centering the voices of artists who are working today. And that commitment is powerfully expressed in our current exhibition, Native Now, Contemporary Indigenous Art, at the Rockwell Museum, which invites us to consider the diversity and vitality of Indigenous perspectives. It also is a timely reminder that there is no singular American story. Really, it's a constellation of voices, histories, and lived experiences. And this was noted by the New York Times. I don't know if you saw in Sunday's museum section, Native Now was prominently featured. As part of this anniversary year, we are presenting a series of public programs that bring artists, scholars, and cultural leaders into dialogue with our community. Tonight's lecture is part of the Making History, Making Change series, a national collaboration between the Smithsonian Institution and its affiliate organizations, featuring expert-led talks that explore people, moments, and ideals that continue to shape our shared American story. The Rockwell Museum is one of only 25 Smithsonian affiliates participating in this initiative. And I just want to take a moment and to thank the Smithsonian and say how grateful we are for making this collaboration possible. In addition to the Smithsonian, we are deeply grateful for the substantial support of our 50th anniversary lecture series given in memory of Nat and Wilhelmina Wallen, Their belief in this transformative power of art and education resonates throughout programs like this, and I want to thank the Wallen family for their generosity. Tonight, Rebecca Trautmann will speak on Water's Edge, the Art of Truman Lowe, the first major retrospective of this distinguished Hoocąk artist. Truman Lowe is an internationally acclaimed sculptor, curator, and educator. He created works that reflect deep connections to the waters, the woodlands, and the cultural traditions of his Hoocąk heritage. His practice explored themes of memory, place, and knowledge, and his influence continues to shape generations of artists and scholars today. The exhibition brings together nearly 50 works and is organized around 4 intersecting themes that Rebecca will guide us through this evening. We are especially proud, though, here at the Rockwell, that 4 works on paper from Lowe's Water Reflection series that are part of the Rockwell Museum's permanent collection are featured in this landmark exhibition at the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. That is on view until January 1st, 2027. So I do hope if you're in the D.C. area, you have to go see this exhibition and say hello to the 4 works that are on loan from the Rockwell. Here at the museum, though, you can see his works here at the museum. In fact, Feather Basket, a sculpture by Truman Lowe, is on view in the adjacent Native American gallery, and a woodcut print titled Sunform is on view in the exhibition Native Now, offering a direct connection between tonight's talk and works in our own collection. It is a privilege to steward and share the work of Truman Lowe and so many other Native artists, particularly here on the ancestral homelands of the Seneca Nation, one of the 6 nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. The accompanying exhibition catalog for Water's Edge, and I show it to you here, edited by Rebecca Trautmann, is available for purchase in the museum store this evening. This gorgeous book, which features 100+ images, including the 4 works on loan from the Rockwell, has been signed very graciously by Rebecca earlier today, and we have a limited number of signed copies of the book available, so please be sure to pick up your copy of the book tonight. Rebecca Head Trautmann brings a distinguished record of curatorial leadership to her role at the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian. In addition to Water's Edge, her projects include Stretching the Canvas, 8 Decades of Native Painting, and the National Native American Veterans Memorial. Her scholarship and exhibitions have played a significant role in advancing the field of contemporary Native American art and in elevating Indigenous voices within major museum contexts. It is truly a privilege to welcome Rebecca this evening to speak on the work of Truman Lowe, an artist whose work resonates so deeply with the mission of the Rockwell Museum and our collection. So please join me in extending a warm welcome to Rebecca Head Trautmann. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin, for that really generous introduction. I appreciate it. And my deep, sincere thanks to the staff of the Rockwell Museum for inviting me here, for making our visit possible, and for being such wonderful, gracious hosts. It's really nice to be here. I'm excited to have the opportunity to talk with all of you tonight about the artwork of Truman Lowe, which is the focus, as Erin said, of a major exhibition at the National Museum of the American Indian. And I'd like to begin also by gratefully acknowledging the Seneca people on whose ancestral homelands we've gathered tonight. So last November, the National Museum of the American Indian opened Water's Edge, the Art of Truman Lowe, the first full career retrospective of the acclaimed artist's work. It's on view at our museum in Washington, D.C., as Erin said, through January of next year. So I do hope that you'll have a chance to come up and see it, or come down and see it, sorry. So Truman Lowe has been described, I'm going to put this down a little to make sure you can hear me okay. Truman Lowe has been described by the Cherokee artist, Kay Walking Stick, as the preeminent native sculptor of his generation. Lowe is known for his elegant, minimalist sculptures of willow branches, feathers, and other organic materials that evoke the rivers, streams, and waterfalls of the Wisconsin woodlands where he was raised. The canoes used to travel these waters are another recurring subject of his work. They're often made of peeled willow saplings, sometimes filled with feathers as this one is, and this creates the impression of floating on air. Lowe's work also includes pastel and charcoal drawings and mixed media works on paper, and it reflects on the creative practices, stories, and cultural knowledge of his Hoocąk community and his family. And I should note that the Hoocąk were formerly called the Winnebago, and so you'll sometimes hear them still called that today, before they were returned to their own name for themselves, the Hoocąk Nation. So Lowe explored dwellings and other structures built of wood, and human marks on the land in the form of pictographs, petroglyphs, and also effigy mounds, which he was really fascinated by. And these are mounds of earth made by ancestral people, particularly in Wisconsin, there are a lot of them, and often made in the form of a bear or a bird or a human, or sometimes just abstract forms, but he was really fascinated by these. So Water's Edge brings together 48 of Lowe's sculptures, drawings, and paintings, with rarely seen monumental sculptures and a number of previously unexhibited drawings. It includes 28 works from the National Museum of the American Indians collection and significant works that are on loan from different museums and private collections, including, as Erin noted, 4 really beautiful drawings from the Rockwell Museums, and we're so grateful and thrilled to be able to include them. Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't ready to advance yet. Instead of following a chronological framework for the exhibition, it's organized around 4 key themes that Lowe explored and returned to throughout his career. These are broad themes, and they're really intersecting. They kind of overlap a lot in his work. So these 4 themes are moving water, the land holds memory, which addresses human relationships to landscape and place, woodland structures, and memory and shared knowledge. And so I'll talk about each of these themes as we go through the exhibition. But again, these themes are intentionally very fluid and intersecting. So moving water is the first of the 4 themes. The title of the exhibition, Water's Edge, is taken from a quote from the artist who said in 1991, "If I have a signature, it is the willows on the water's edge." The title speaks to the centrality of water in much of Lowe's work. It suggests his remarkable ability to transform wood into water and the apparent contradiction between water's fluid movement and wood's solidity. And visually, the title calls to mind the crisp edges of the arcing wood slats that he used in his waterfall sculptures. Truman Lowe was born in 1944 in Black River Falls, Wisconsin. He was raised in the Hoocąk community near there, and he spent a great deal of time as a child along the banks of the Black River and its tributary streams, fishing, swimming, playing in the water, gathering berries with his family, and using some of the river stones that he found there as his first drawing materials. And I love this photograph of him when he was about 4 years old, wearing these hip-high wader boots like he's getting ready to go, walk along the river. So these formative experiences really contributed to a lifelong fascination with moving water, and it's something he continued to explore throughout his career. Lowe grew up surrounded by creativity, including his mother's ribbon and beadwork and his parents' black ash plaited baskets. His father was known for his expertly carved bentwood basket handles, and his mother was known for her use of color in her baskets and her ribbon work applique. And so this photo shows the 2 of them, Martin Lowe and Mabel Davis Lowe, working together on baskets. You see Martin at the back carving one of these bent wood handles for a basket, and Mabel weaving a black ash basket. So Lowe learned from his father where to gather different kinds of materials, different kinds of wood, different kinds of trees, how to select the best materials for different purposes, and how to split the wood and prepare it for use. He drew inspiration from all of these things for his later work. And here I'd like you to particularly notice the very thin, flexible slats of black ash that Mabel is working with on the basket, and we'll come back to those a bit later. So as an adult, Lowe enjoyed recreational canoeing and gathering the riverine willow saplings that feature prominently in much of his work. In sculptures of wood and metal and pastel and charcoal drawings, he frequently portrayed dramatic waterfalls, fast-moving rivers, quiet slivers of streams and marshes, and the plant life along their shores. He said, "I can use southern pine because its grain and aging resins give me the sense of a breeze crossing the water, that refractive or reflective texture." In sculptures such as Stream 2, which we see here, he worked with the wood's grain to suggest the movement of a stream's surface and the contours of its banks. Lowe created his monumental sculpture, Ottawa, for the landmark 1992 exhibition, Land, Spirit, Power, at the National Gallery of Canada. This was the first time that the work of Indigenous contemporary artists had been featured in a major exhibition there, so it was really, really a significant exhibition. And this photograph actually shows the sculpture as it is installed in our gallery for the current exhibition. So Land, Spirit, Power, which notably took place in 1992, was a response to celebrations of the 500-year anniversary of Columbus's arrival in the Americas, and to exhibitions that had typically treated Indigenous people as no longer here or as existing solely in a romantic past. Lowe's sculpture, Ottawa, captures the turbulent rapids and powerful falls of the three major rivers, the Ottawa, Rideau, and Gatineau, that come together at the site where the Canadian capital was established, which had been historically a significant trading site and gathering place for Indigenous people. So Lowe spoke frequently about water and its significance, describing a river as a metaphor for life, time, and experience. He said, "Moving water fascinates me more than lakes or ponds. It's just the idea of where rivers come from and where they're going. They really symbolize our lives in a real sense. Humanity has continued for generations, for thousands of years, and we're alive for a brief part of it." He spoke about standing along a river's banks, looking and listening upstream to see where the river has come from, and watching as it flows past and out of sight. "The stretch of the river that's visible to you," he said, "is sort of like your life." And another time he said, "We embody the benefits of previous generations' work and organization, and what we will contribute is still down the river." So this is another view of the same piece, a detail that shows you something at kind of the upper end of the piece. So Lowe was intrigued by water's surface ripples and reflections, and also by the hidden life and the smooth, tumbled river stones within, and the relationship between a river and the land through which it flows. So in this photograph, you can see that there are willow branches suspended beneath the sculpture within its open framework, and they're meant to really suggest the river's relationship to the land it's flowing through, the way that the river both draws water from and feeds it back into the earth as it passes through. Lowe made a series of waterfall sculptures over the course of his career, and he took different approaches to them. In this piece, called Waterfall 99, which is in the collection of the Eiteljorg Museum in Indianapolis, we can see tumbling willow branches suggesting the organic flow of water set against the order of a minimalist grid. And I'll point out, because it can be a little hard to tell from some of the photographs, the scale of the work, but this is actually quite large. It's about 12 feet wide by about 8 feet high. So Lowe harvested and peeled the willow himself, and he left its textures and imperfections visible. Willow saplings were one of his favorite materials to work with in his sculptures. He appreciated their pliability when the bark was peeled away just after harvesting. He could then bend the flexible branches into shapes that they would hold when they dried. The lightness and brightness of the inner wood appealed to him, as did the dark, winding trails that were left behind by burrowing insects. And he joked that he wanted to find some really smart bugs and train them to make just the paths that he wanted through the wood. Willows are known to be water-loving plants with a strong connection to the rivers along whose banks they grow. When people would marvel at his ability to transform solid wood into water, he'd reply that the wood is water, and he described the way that liquids would stream out of the willow saplings when he peeled them. He spoke about the relationship between wood and water, the way that trees draw water upward from the ground through their roots and their fibers. He recalled gathering ash trees along a river with his father, and his grandmother filling a cup with sweet water from a birch tree when he was young. His use of wood as his primary material was a link to the woodland home of his youth and to his father's and his community's deep understanding of wood and its properties. While Lowe's waterfall sculptures vary a great deal, their streams of falling water are typically set against a visible grid framework. In his use of narrow, finely cut slats of wood to represent the cascading water, he drew on his memories of his parents' work with similar splints of black ash in making their baskets. So you'll recall those arcing slats of wood that we saw in the photograph of them making baskets. And he was also drawing on, he was also drawing on his understanding from this experience of the wood's flexibility and strength. Waterfall 8 marks the culmination of his waterfall series, and the sculpture is really graceful, elegant, and powerful. It was created for a 2011 exhibition at the Denver Botanic Garden, and it's now in the collection of the Denver Art Museum. Lowe enjoyed working in series because it allowed him to continue exploring and experimenting with a concept or a form, refining his approach until he felt like he'd really accomplished what he set out to do. So here, the several offset tiers of finely shaved pine slats suggest the energy and life of a river as it tumbles, kind of rushes over this uneven, rocky precipice. Lowe was captivated by water, and he returned to it again and again in his artwork, depicting rushing rivers, cascading waterfalls, and slow-moving streams and marshy wetlands. While his sculptures focus on water's power, energy, and drama, his striking pastel and charcoal drawings portray the glimmering reflections, soft ripples, and changing colors on a river's surface. His 4 water reflection drawings in the Rockwell Museum's collection were made for a 1999 exhibition at the Kohler Museum, and we're really thrilled to be able to include them in our exhibition. So these are the first 2 of the series, Water Reflection 1 and Water Reflection 2, and you can see the way that he's kind of trying out different approaches to portraying the kind of the surface ripples and reflections on the water. And these are the third and fourth works in the series. So Lowe's daughter, Tanya Lowe, recalled that her father would often pause beside a river or a stream and watch the surface of the water. He would point out the movement, the light, and the color, emphasizing how different the water can look as it flows. And so here again, you really, you get a sense of the reflections in particular on the water. The one at the left, I think of looking at the surface of a river and seeing the reflections of trees from the opposite banks on the water. Nipusaka, or sand on water, which is in the collection of the Smithsonian American Art Museum, is composed of loose sand arranged on these 8 curving wood shelves. And so the 8 shelves, when you install the work, are just arranged on the wall as you see them here, and then you take the loose sand and pour it onto the shelves and let it kind of mound where it will. So each time it's installed, it looks a little bit different. So the deceptively simple sculpture explores the ways that a river's shifting course reshapes the banks, the earth and sand of its banks as it shifts course over time. It also suggests the waves in water, and it suggests, again, the movement of earth into effigy mounds by ancestral woodland people. And I have to say, this is a favorite for kids visiting the museum because they're just fascinated. Is that real sand? Is it glued to the shelves, or is it just poured there? Okay, so the land holds memory is the second of the 4 major themes. Lowe's sense of place and of home was informed by his youth in the bountiful Wisconsin woodlands, but also by stories that he heard when visiting his mother's relatives in Nebraska about Hoocąk people's forced removal from and return to their homeland in Wisconsin. Through a series of treaties from 1829 to the 1970s, Hoocąk people were repeatedly removed from their home in what had come to be known as Wisconsin to a succession of reservations in Iowa, Minnesota, Dakota Territory, and finally eastern Nebraska. But each time that they were moved, some Hoocąk people would return to Wisconsin, to their home territory. And so finally, in 1881, the state passed legislation that permitted them to return there and to remain there. Lowe talked about his own connection to this place, to the woodlands of Wisconsin, and the impact of his own movement away and back again. When he took a teaching position for a couple of years in Kansas, as he later reflected, he discovered that he was really a woodland Indian and wanted to return to Wisconsin and to be with the trees and the woods that he'd grown up with. In a 1995 artist statement, he wrote, "The landscape of the woodlands continues to be the source of my work." Lowe was interested in the dynamic, shifting visual relationships among trees in a forest canopy. He loved walking through the woods and looking at walking through the woods in winter and looking at the changing shapes of the trees overhead. So he intertwined willow saplings and branches in his totem sculptures to suggest the leafless branches of the woods in winter. Works such as Totem for Hinu, or first daughter, which we see at the right here, and Totem for Kunu, or first son, at the left, draw visually and conceptually on that forested landscape. Lowe liked the idea of creating his own totems, and I imagine that most of you are familiar with the totem poles created by indigenous people on the Northwest coast, right? So he said, "We have no concrete evidence that woodland Indians built totems. I'm sure we had them, though. If we did not, then I think we might need them. Totems tell us a lot." And so they tell us a lot about what's important to people. So these totems are named for Lowe's daughter and son, and these towering sculptures express his family's deep connection to their woodland home and to the intimate knowledge of trees and wood that he'd learned from his father. And these works, as I think I mentioned, are in the Smithsonian American Art Museum's collection. And the curator of sculpture there, who contributed an essay to our book, suggests that looking at these sculptures together, thinking about them being made for his son and his daughter, drawing on this knowledge from his own father, these might be considered a kind of intergenerational family portrait. Wachni, or canoe form, brings together several of these themes, the themes of water, landscape or place, and the canoe. So Wachni is named for the Hoocąk words for canoe and water, and it creates the impression of viewing a passing vessel from below. So here he's really constructed not just the canoe, not just the watercraft itself, but also the environment for which it's built. The open frame and the overhead suspension kind of place the viewer within the water, within the river below, and within the swaying, river grasses. And they do kind of move a bit as you're walking past as the air moves. And then you get the sense of the sunlight filtering down from above through the water's rippling surface. Lowe's poetic water spirit sculptures, the first of these is shown at the left, and the smaller sculpture Mimi, portray the reeds and other wetland plants that grow in the marshy areas along a river's shore, windblown and sometimes with plant detritus or feathers tangled in their branches after floodwaters have receded. They seem to conjure the ephemeral life that you can sense when you're canoeing in shallow waters. Lowe made Mimi, the sculpture at the right, as a gift for dear friends, and he named it for their daughter. So suspended from 4 gently arcing willow branches are blue jay feathers that Mimi had gathered for him to use in his artwork. And along with the blue jay feathers are groups of small red beads that are hung on the strips of leather that support the feathers. The number 4 held a particular significance for Lowe, and key elements of his sculpture frequently occur in 4s. He spoke about the number's meaning in Hoocąk philosophy and cosmology, explaining, "Whenever anything happens in a sequence of 4 in our traditional Winnebago culture, it can be considered significant. The 4 seasons, the 4 directions, things that become repetitious in this way will last. They have permanence. Here, the number 4 repeats throughout the sculpture in the groupings of feathers, willow branches, and beads. And I often tell people on tours of the exhibition that once I once I tell them this, once I point out the 4, they start seeing 4s everywhere in his work. And when I said to Truman, when he told me about, explained this about the number 4, I said, "Oh, now I see 4s everywhere." He said, "I shouldn't have told you my secret." Joking, though, he didn't mind sharing that. So Lowe was also interested in marks left on the land by ancestral indigenous people, including, again, those many effigy mounds that are in and around Wisconsin, as well as the petroglyphs on rock walls there and beyond. So these 2 small sculptures are from his petroglyph series of the mid-1990s, and the one at left suggests the silhouette of a canoe, which is a prominent motif in Lowe's work, as we will see. He began his series of sky chart sculptures in the mid-1980s when his son grew interested in astronomy. These works also suggest pictographic markings, and they represent the movement of stars and constellations through the sky and the ways that they've been used for navigation and for tracking the changing seasons by indigenous people. Arcing willow branches and carved wood feathers are arranged within an open wood frame, and their shadows lend the piece a sense of depth and movement. So the third of the 3 key themes that he addressed in his work is woodland structures. When Lowe was a student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the early 1970s, he experimented, as many people were doing then, with synthetic materials that were then very current, including plastics and resins. But after he completed his Master of Fine Arts degree, he made a decision to move away from these potentially toxic materials and to turn back to the readily available natural materials that he'd been surrounded by as he was growing up. He said, "My father's use, respect, and knowledge of wood became my own quest and primary direction. I discovered what I wanted to do, to use those materials and those natural forms and materials reflecting where I grew up." He was interested, he said, in the simplicity of the forms of natural wood and what's actually underneath the bark. And he recalled in 2017 that growing up in the woodlands, I was fascinated by the shape of the trees and the shape of the willow when it's peeled. And so this photograph shows him in 1980 in one of his first solo exhibitions, and you can see just a portion, we'll see the full work in the next slide, but a portion of one of the sculptures he did of kind of the framework of a dwelling, of a traditional dwelling. So Lowe was intrigued by the ingenuity of woodland people's techniques for constructing canoes, dwellings, and other structures from wood. And so here we see that full sculpture along with some of the other sculptures in the exhibition. He built the frameworks of chiporoque, or wigwams, from willow saplings or sometimes from milled wood, and then later, for permanent outdoor sculptures, he made them from steel. He also depicted them in drawings, as we saw earlier, and this one is set within a snowy winter landscape. Within this theme of woodland structures, Lowe he particularly admired what he considered to be the ideal architecture of a canoe. He observed that it's perfectly suited to its environment and that it's changed very little over time. He loved both the canoe's form and the experience of floating in one. He made many varied sculptures of canoes over the years, often using peeled willow saplings joined together with strips of leather, as we see here, or sometimes with copper wire. And he was really reducing the vessels to their elemental forms, really simplifying them. He once said, "If I have a religion, it must be canoeing." And he likened the experience of sitting in a canoe on the water to being suspended between the earth and the sky. And I think that he'd be really fascinated by the archaeological canoes, some of them thousands of years old, that have recently been discovered at the bottom of Lake Mendota in Madison. So just in the few years since his passing in 2019, a lot of these canoes have been discovered, and I just think he would have loved them. And I love the way that he's, again, in both drawings and sculptures, exploring the same themes, but in quite different ways. His feather canoe sculptures of the mid-1990s capture the sensation that he described as flying on water. Their open structure of interwoven willow branches, recalling openwork woven baskets, gives them a sense of lightness and airiness, and it creates an impression of floating. The soft white feathers within suggest both flight and the nest of an egret or another kind of a shorebird. Lowe's feather canoe sculptures are closely related to his striking feather basket sculptures, two of which are in the Rockwell Museum's collection. So Lowe was interested in the rookeries of egrets and other birds along the Mississippi River, and in the nest's internal structures, which we can liken to the structures of baskets. He made this sculpture of wood, and I think you can kind of see that it was made of bent willow twigs and carved wood feathers before he later cast it in bronze. Lowe was also interested in the exquisite feather-covered gift baskets. They're almost jewel-like, made by pomo weavers in California in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And these are suggested by the delicately painted basket form in his wood sculpture, which is on view on this floor, right? Really a beautiful piece. It was exciting to get to see it here. So to Lowe, feathers symbolize hope, trust, power, and spirit. And you see that there are also these painted willow branches kind of attached to the basket. It's really a beautiful sculpture. So returning to his canoes, though, Chief takes his dog for a ride, shows Lowe's playful sense of humor. Here we see a single curved piece of willow representing the canoe's form. The chief is a literal stick figure with a feathered headdress, and he's propelling the boat forward with a paddle while his canine companion rides in front. The simplified forms of the canoe, man, and dog again call to mind pictographic drawings. Okay, and the fourth of these key themes is memory and shared knowledge. Lowe's work also addressed cultural, personal, and family knowledge, memories, and stories. He was intrigued by mnemonic devices, by the ways in which knowledge is given physical form and or expression, and is encoded, preserved, and communicated. These included items known as prescription sticks. These are flat, rectangular pieces of wood. They look a little bit like kind of old wood rulers, but they're incised with symbols around their edges, representing different kinds of plants, and they indicate the types of plants that are used in preparing different kinds of medicinal compounds. So prescription sticks were made by indigenous peoples of the Great Lakes region, particularly the Potawatomi, in the mid to late 19th century, which was a time when they were being driven through war, treaty, forced removal, and confinement to reservations from their homelands and from the resources, particularly these plant resources that they knew so well and had relied upon for generations. So in his mnemonic series of drawings and sculptures, Lowe was contemplating these tools and their makers' determination to sustain this cultural knowledge and heritage. This 1993 pastel on paper drawing depicts an ochre-hued, roughly rectangular shape bordered in bold red with turquoise linear markings around its edges, suggesting different kinds of plant forms. And then there's a smudged area at center that kind of suggests the worn surface of the wood. He returned to this subject several years later in this untitled gesso and pastel drawing on paper. And it's kind of a moodier, more impressionistic drawing with a longer, narrower board in a wash of brown with more abstract plant-like markings in red around its edges. And so the title of these drawings, though, particularly the earlier one, Mnemonic, really points to his interest in these boards' roles as memory aids. In a related work that was begun about 1985 and is also titled Mnemonic, Lowe gave the prescription stick sculptural form. So framing willow saplings are tied together with strips of leather and braced by two crossbars that form an X at the center of the piece. Abstract floral and plant forms made out of willow twigs, tissue paper, and cross-section discs cut from willow branches project into the central space. The wood's knots and irregularities are left visible, as he typically did, as are the dark paths left behind by burrowing insects. While Truman was sculpting with wood, he wasn't carving solid forms out of large blocks of wood. Instead, he really preferred to create open sculptural forms through which we can see, and he likened this experience to looking through water, seeing both what's on the surface and what's underneath. In his use of plant materials, and I'll go back to the other slide for a moment, in his use of plant materials that he harvested and prepared by hand to create the sculpture, he's tying the prescription sticks' role as carriers of knowledge of indigenous plants and their properties and medicinal uses to his own understanding, inherited from his father, of the trees and plants of the Wisconsin woodlands and their properties and uses. Lowe constructed the sculpture mnemonic canoe with willow twigs, pine, and stones before he cast it in bronze about a year later. So pictographic forms again, made originally of bent willow twigs, depict a person in a canoe set above an open rectangular structure. Within this framework, they're suspended below the canoe, a forked stick holds a smooth river stone between downward pointing arms that are joined by a strip of rawhide. Lowe spoke about having a revelation while he was watching the movement of a river that when he floated in a canoe, he was both on the earth and above it at once. And he related this to the Hoocąk moiety system, which divides the tribe's clans into those represented by animals above the earth, or birds, and those that are represented by animals of the earth. And so people would customarily marry somebody from one of the clans in the opposite or complementary moiety. And so for Lowe, he realized that the experience of canoeing, of being suspended between the earth and sky, brought together his mother's bear clan and his father's thunderbird clan in a really profound and tangible way. And so this symbol that's suspended beneath the canoe is his personal symbol for the Hoocąk moiety system. So mnemonic canoe really encapsulates his understanding of the Hoocąk clan system and cosmology and his own place within it, in simple but powerful forms. Lowe's 1996 sculpture, Wadushi, or Bundle, is constructed, again, of very simple materials, wood, crumpled paper, and strips of hide. It was made in response to his experience visiting an ancestral mound site, and it's a meditation on the care with which we treat the things that we hold dear. So it's a really striking, large-scale installation, and I'll point out, because it's difficult to get a sense of scale on the slides, that each of these bundles is about 18 feet long. So there are 4 clusters, of long, slender willow branches, stripped of their bark. They're wrapped at their centers with waxed brown craft paper, and each group is bound together with strips of leather. The bundles are suspended horizontally at about eye level so that they appear to float in space. This is the first piece of Lowe's that we collected, and each time I asked him about it, he told me a different story, which I think shows the many layers of meaning that it holds. So Wadushi was inspired by Lowe's experience visiting an archaeological site known as Wycliffe Mounds in what is now western Kentucky. The site includes the remains of a town that was built and occupied from about 1100 to 1350 AD by the ancestral people referred to today as the Mississippian civilization. When Lowe entered one of the mounds, he was struck by the way that archaeologists had excavated around the wrapped remains that were buried there, and they left them kind of atop pedestals of earth or sand so that they seemed to be suspended or to float within the space. He said that it was such a powerful, moving experience that he felt compelled to create something in response. And so he was thinking about things that he'd learned from his parents and from other elders about the ways that we care for our loved ones when they pass on to prepare them for their next journey. He also explained that his mother was of a generation that when she traveled, she didn't use a suitcase, she just wrapped her belongings bundled them in a blanket and was ready to go. And he was also thinking about the way that as a child, he had protected his own treasures, by bundling them, keeping them together. And so the sculpture really suggests this protective bundling in preparation for a journey, whether it's a physical journey or a spiritual one. And it also echoes symbolically the form of a medicine bundle, although he was very careful not to exploit or to reveal sensitive cultural knowledge. So he used the form of the bundle to convey the care with which we protect the things that we value, carry with us, and want to pass on to future generations. These include both the tangible and the intangible, so material and cultural traditions, family heirlooms, history and stories, values and language. His use of humble, everyday materials suggests his deep appreciation for the things that are both ordinary and extraordinary that make up cultural heritage and are worthy of being preserved. And in repeating the bundle 4 times, he gives weight and power to the work, to the ideas that the work carries, and to the responsibility that it embodies. So this photo shows Lowe with Wadushi when we exhibited in 2010. He often used Hoocąk words, as he did here, in naming his works, and he would turn to his older brother Cloris for guidance in what were the right words to use. Hoocąk was his first language as a child, but he wasn't fluent in it later in his life as an adult. So Cloris's son and grandson, Truman's nephew and great-nephew, have worked with the Hoocąk Nation's Language Division in their efforts to teach and preserve the Hoocąk language. We were fortunate in the exhibition to be able to bring Lowe's voice into the gallery, which was very important to us, through an audio guide and also through a short film, which includes excerpts from interviews with Truman. Both of these include excerpts from interviews with him speaking about the work. And so it gives visitors an opportunity to hear directly from him, also to get a sense of his personality and the way he thought and spoke about his work. In addition to Lowe's work as an artist, he taught for 35 years at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he educated generations of students, teaching sculpture and coordinating Native American studies programs. When he retired in 2009, he was recognized as a professor emeritus. From 2000 to 2008, he also served as the first curator of contemporary art at the National Museum of the American Indian, and he organized a number of significant, impactful exhibitions and catalogs. These included Native Modernism, the art of George Morrison and Alan Hauser, which was the first contemporary art exhibition when the museum opened in 2004, as well as a major exhibition of Fritz Scholder's work and exhibitions of James Luna and Edgar Heap of birds at the Venice Biennale. He also acquired significant works by Indigenous contemporary artists for the museum's collection, laying a foundation for this part of the collection, which is now one of our very important primary areas for collecting. I had the great fortune and privilege to work with Lowe for several years and to benefit from his mentorship and his friendship. In 2022, a few years after his passing, the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, which was his undergraduate alma mater, dedicated its visual and performing arts facility as the Truman T. Lowe Center for the Arts in his honor. The following year, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he earned his Master of Fine Arts degree, installed his sculpture Effigy Bird Form on its grounds, where it really calls attention to Hoocąk people's long history and continuing presence in that place. Over the past several years, we've seen dramatic changes in the ways that Indigenous contemporary art is regarded. The work of Lowe and other Indigenous artists is now collected and exhibited by mainstream art museums and galleries and is displayed prominently alongside those of their non-native peers. The Rockwell Museum has really been ahead of the curve on this, having built an incredible collection of the work of Indigenous contemporary artists over the past 25 years. And it's really exciting to see so much of it on view upstairs as well as in the Native Now exhibition. So these changes that we've seen over the past several years in the American art landscape are things that Lowe really played an essential role in making possible. Through his creative work and his artistic independence, through his work as a curator and educator, and his mentorship of a generation of artists, curators, and educators and scholars, he made an enduring impact on American and Native North American art. So the Water's Edge exhibition, as Erin very kindly pointed out, is accompanied by a catalog that brings together multiple new perspectives on Lowe's work, with essays by several art historians, curators, and an afterword by Lowe's daughter, Tanya Lowe. The book also includes really moving reflections by artists who knew Lowe and were impacted by him or by his work as an artist or as an educator and curator, which really demonstrates his continuing impact. The artists who contributed include Kay Walkingstick, Sky Hopinka, Joe Fedderson, John Hitchcock, Diani Whitehawk, Michael Belmore, and Andrea Reynosa. We're organizing a series of public and educational programs over the exhibition's run, and as part of our Native Knowledge 360s, curricula and educator materials, we're developing a series of artist spotlight resources. The first of these on the artist Jeffrey Gibson was released earlier this year, and we're now developing units on Truman Lowe and on the tapestry artist D.Y. Begay. And while it hasn't been publicly announced yet, the Water's Edge exhibition will travel next year to a major art museum in Wisconsin. I won't specify the name because it's not announced yet, but it was really important to us for the exhibition to travel closer to Truman's family and his Hoocąk community, who may not be able to travel to Washington to see the work. And so details about this will be announced soon. So we're continuing to organize exhibitions of Indigenous contemporary art, building on the foundation that Lowe created when he was the curator at the museum. These include Stretching the Canvas. So you mentioned that we showed this in our New York museum a few years ago as Stretching the Canvas, 8 Decades of Native Painting. We're expanding this exhibition and opening it next month in our museum in Washington, D.C. as Stretching the Canvas, 10 Decades of Native American Painting. So it's kind of tracing a century of painting by Indigenous artists from our collection, and that's opening next month. So returning to Water's Edge and Truman Lowe's work, Lowe's meditations on the qualities and movement of water really afforded him a seemingly limitless source of inspiration. He said, "When I see a stream and the movement of the water, I know I am alive." Through his explorations of woodland landscapes and human marks on the land, Hoocąk people's creative practices and built structures, and the ways that we encode, protect, and pass on essential knowledge, as well as his work as an educator, curator, and mentor, Lowe really created an enduring artistic legacy. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about Lowe and his work.
Well, thank you very much, Rebecca. That was a fantastic and insightful presentation. So we're going to open it up for questions. My name's Amy. I'm one of the educators here. I have a microphone, so if you have a question, if you want to raise your hand, I'll come to you, and if you can speak your question into the microphone, that would be great so everyone can hear.
Thank you for your presentation. It's great. I have a question about the willow, and you peel it, and then you mentioned drying it out. Is it a fragile work? How do you conserve it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So he is working with very ephemeral materials, fragile materials. So part of the work that we do at the National Museum of the American Indian, we bring in artists whose work we've collected, and our conservators and curators interview them together and record this, talking with them about their intentions for the work and for how it should age over time. And this is especially important with an artist working with such fragile materials as Lowe did. And so we did that with him, spent time, recording a conversation with him and better understanding his intentions for his work. And it's interesting because he was not very precious about it. So, we'd, particularly for the piece with the kind of willow frame with the small plant forms suspended within it, we said, what if one of these small twigs were to break? He said, I've got more, I'll send you some more. It was very, very, again, just not precious about it. But of course, we work to store the work, to show it in the best possible way to really preserve it. Within the exhibition, it was really important for us to preserve a sense of the openness of his work, and so we didn't want to put things as much as possible within cases, so we used kind of a combination of platforms and stanchions to give the work space, but also to keep it open so that people can really see the work, see the willow, see the textures of the willow. So, but yeah, he did talk about how he loved working with willow. He loved harvesting it, along the rivers, and peeling it. And his daughter Tanya spoke about how she often was kind of called into service to help peel the willow. But then he'd bend it into different shapes and kind of tie it with a strip of the bark he'd just peeled off of it, and it would hold that shape. And yeah, it's, when he was at the museum, he had some of these willow branches in his office, and when he left and went back to Wisconsin, cleaned out his office, somebody was going to throw those away. And I said, no, you can't throw them away. So now I have them in my office to remind me of Truman. So, yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, back here.
How would you describe his personality?
Oh, he was such a wonderful person to work with. And so for many of my colleagues who worked on the exhibition with me knew him well, and others who didn't kind of felt like they came to know him through the process of creating the exhibition. But he was a really kind, really generous person, always supporting and mentoring, whether it was students as he was teaching or his colleagues at the museum. He had a great sense of humor. He had this kind of very deep, calming voice. We called it his radio voice, or other people called him the Hoocąk Barry White. Just had this very, very deep, calming voice, and just there's kind of just this serene quality, which I think you really get a sense of in his work, and in the exhibition gallery, we really went to bring that sense into the space. So just a really kind, thoughtful, caring, funny, generous person.
Wonderful. All right. Any questions? Oh, one on this side.
This was really fascinating, but one of the themes that I kept hearing was his capturing of the impermanent, whether it was the water or trees or whatever it was. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So he's kind of working in the tradition of minimalism, reducing forms into their essential elements. But a lot of minimalist work is, made of very permanent, made of metals, like very solid, very impersonal. And so he's really bringing back the personal and the natural into his work. But you're right that both in his materials and in the things that he's representing, many of them, it is really capturing this ephemeral, these ephemeral qualities of the movement of water, of the reflections on water, of stories and memory and knowledge, and so kind of finding ways to capture these and make them somewhat permanent, but also respecting and understanding their ephemerality. Yeah.
Thank you. Oh.
Tying into that question, did he make any statements about when he cast things in bronze?
Yeah, that's interesting too. So he didn't do a lot of casting work in bronze, but he did have an opportunity to do a number of his sculptures that he'd initially created in willow and cast them in bronze. I think that he felt especially close to the process of working with wood himself and that really hands-on aspect, but he also really appreciated having the opportunity to create some works in bronze, and he did create some outdoor sculptures in steel or aluminum too, and so that kind of gives those works a bit of a greater sense of permanence. And the patinas on the bronze works are really, really beautiful, really lovely. So I think it's kind of an interesting, different aspect of his work.
Thank you. I think we have time for one or two more questions.
Thank you, Rebecca, for this introduction. I mean, that was fascinating. Well, that is fascinating still. One thing that strikes me is this mix of traditional themes with a very modern and at times abstract execution. So the question is, if you can comment on how the art historian are looking at his body of work. Are they looking at it as a continuum based on traditions of native artists, or is it more perceived as a disruption from that perspective?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think that he's really, so he was a very cosmopolitan person, traveled the world, exhibited internationally, art school trained, very aware of both his own communities, traditions and practices, other indigenous communities, creative practices, and also very knowledgeable about art history more broadly and contemporary art movements. And so, he's kind of living in all of those places and creating very contemporary work that is also deeply connected to his culture, to his family's creative practices, his community's knowledge. And so, and I really think that a lot of, probably most, if not all, Indigenous contemporary artists are doing the same thing in different ways. So creating work that's very much now, very contemporary, very knowledgeable about the world today, but also deeply connected to their own communities, their own cultural heritage, and so kind of bridging those, bringing them together. So so I think it's kind of a challenge for those of us curators working with this work to recognize all of those different aspects of the work, and to bring all of them forward, and really to bring the artist's voice forward too.
Thank you, and I think that's a great place to end, bringing the artist's voices forward. So thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. I just want to share that our Native Now exhibition is on view through May 4th, so please come back and see it. We have about a week and a half left, and thank you again to Rebecca Trautmann for a wonderful, engaging presentation. Thanks.
Thank you.